I think most people that worked on Joe will tell you that was the best job they ever had, you know. And I think when you stop doing something you really enjoy, don't have the opportunity, you know, there's a part of you that's missing.
G.I. Joe Avalanche requested Cobra Revenge.
Welcome back to the channel. For this week's video, I sat down and had a really awesome conversation with one of the influential vehicle designers from the G.I. Joe A Real American Hero line in the mid-'80s, Frank CORONEOS. And I brought my friend Dan Klingensmith from the Toy Files podcast and the awesome Creating G.I. Joe book series along to help me have a very awesome conversation with Frank. He's a fantastic designer, and he worked on real-world military vehicles before he started working at Hasbro. If you're new to the channel, I want to thank you for swinging by and checking out this video. I hope you all enjoy it. There's a lot of awesome information in here, and let's get into it. Frank, originally, before you started designing toys for Hasbro, you worked for a military contractor. Do you want to touch on that and how that kind of helped you in your work at Hasbro?
Sure. You know, when I was in college at Illinois, my dad had retired from the military and took a second career with a company called Cadillac Gauge. That was he was the Middle Eastern marketing manager. I was contacted by them to try to do some work on some coinage or something when I was still in college, and then you know after I graduated, I got a call to interview there, and I was hired as a contract designer. You know, in Detroit, there's a lot of what they call job shoppers, and I was one of those. You know, there's people. These are people that are. I was employed actually through a company called Lincoln Technical Services, and I was able to be involved in helping develop these two vehicles they were working on, trying to get into production. That were both for government contracts. One was a light tank that had the same firepower as the M1, called the Commando Stingray. The other was a six-wheeled vehicle that was replacing a vehicle we had called the V300. It was working name was the V300A1. You know, but I was involved in everything from taking orthographic drawings of components and laying them out, so we had the proper drive angles, and doing packaging studies to figure out how the vehicles would fit. And then because they didn't have an industrial designer before, and no workshop or anything, I started cutting up cardboard boxes, and then I got some foam core. Went to the hardware stores. I tell people in college that was one of the best things I ever did, was learned what was out there. You know, I had two jobs in college. One was working in Kmart and sporting goods, and then another was building materials. But all those jobs that we have that we don't see having relevance later on are things that build in us, just a repository of skills and knowledge that you can use later on. So when I was there, we were trying to get additional funding, and the models that I did actually were instrumental in helping, before we had computers, helping people to visualize and discuss what vehicles might look like, and how they would work. So because I had that opportunity, and I also worked with a guy that was really, he taught technical illustration at one of the community colleges here, and his tech illustrations were so tight, he could do these really detailed drawings from a blueprint that were so accurate that if they changed the blueprint, he could just go back and re-engineer. So those skills that I learned were good skills. And after 3 years, the contract kind of ran up, and I had taken a job with General Motors in their advanced vehicle engineering group doing. I worked on the Fiero, and because the union issues at the time stipulated that designers had to work in paper media, we were building up basically full size chassis components out of illustration board that you delaminated, and then it was a lot of orthographic drawing and really detailed stuff. But all those skills that I learned in doing that were helpful in being able to provide the skills that I eventually would need at Hasbro, and I learned a lot of different things there.
You're one of the few people, if any, I don't think there's anyone else who really came from that type of industry and brought it into the toy company, as far as former military experience in that sense, as far as building real life vehicles and stuff like that. So that's, to me, that's always made you unique.
Yeah, absolutely.
you know.
Well, and yeah, and there's a lot of stuff too. That's why, not that I'm critical of some vehicles here, but there are some vehicles that remain unnamed where I look at them and I just kind of shake my head and go, man, that would never, that would never be something you'd want to be in.
That's where the fantasy had to come into play. And Frank's like, okay,
That's
be a
right.
kid, be a kid,
Don't
be a
talk
kid.
about my Cobra rat like that.
No, there's things like bullet traps, and you were infantry, right? As I recall, and
Yes, sir.
if you're in a vehicle in a tank, the M1 tank had these the on the turrets, the side of the turrets actually had these there were slabs that came down. I don't know if you can see me here. Yeah, they kind of came down like that, and so if somebody's shooting up at a tank,
the angular plates.
Exactly. So those are, if you hit a plate at 90 degrees, that's called 0 degrees obliquity. That goes through the least amount of material, right? But if you angle it, depending on the deflection angle, it's going to at least minimize some of the damage it does. There's just a lot of things that I learned about how real vehicles are made that I tried to apply down the road. I never really got far enough as far as doing some of the real military vehicle stuff I wanted to do. In hindsight, I wish I would have done something that would have been very similar to the vehicles I worked on. And actually, later on, one of the unproduced vehicles was one of those called, maybe you know what I'm talking about, Dan. It was the Grizzly. It was never produced. So.
That's such a fun vehicle. And you just brought up something like with a real world angle. One of the things, I don't know, you tell me, you probably didn't have to you weren't challenged with maybe in the same sense, but how molds would pull from the tooling. Some of the things you had to take when you came to Hasbro, I'm assuming, like you're like, hey, I want to create this, but would it pull from the tooling or would it be breaking? So I'm assuming those are some things that you had to learn along the way, when creating toys, like how the molding process worked and how the tooling process worked.
At Cadillac Gauge, most armored vehicles are made out of armor plate, and they cut them with either some kind of a water jet cutter or and they bend them with these big brake presses. So you basically create you take something and slowly start to bend it, so that's what you can do, and then you cut it out and you can put things together. So everything is very slab sided. When you injection mold something, you have the ability to create any shape that you want, But in our models, learning things about how you create a product that has a very short cycle time, where when you're creating a mold typically has what they call a core side and the cavity side, So when you pull them, they have to be able to pull out. If you've got any kind of an undercut or something that sticks out, or that has a hole that goes in, it increases cycle time. So those are things that I had to learn, at Hasbro. But being there, that was part of the process. And they were really masters of molding.
I know you guys made your models right internally through R&D, learning that they were using wood, to build these models to actually, pull the steel tooling or to make the steel molds. It's like crazy.
If those things were available, those things are works of art in themselves, and I don't know if people have those or if they destroy those after they make them.
I've seen the Millennium Falcon one because it's on the toy.
Yeah,
that's right.
Cool. Show it.
That's right.
Show it.
That's right for that. But yeah, I mean, there's not many. I haven't seen any GI Joe ones that I can recall. Although someone shared a picture of like the maggot. They had some pictures of the tooling for some reason. What I've learned is with all you vehicle guys, majority of you, if not all, prefer to build things by hand.
Mhm.
Like I know talking to Dave Kunitz, that's one of his things. Yeah, sometimes there'd be renderings. Sometimes a model would be built before the renderings. Just depended on who the person was and how it worked. But I know, like, just speaking to you guys, that's one of the art forms that you guys had done back then, and it's not as prevalent today.
Back then, you really had to be a generalist and pretty good at everything. I was actually much better at three-dimensional stuff than I was at 2D stuff. And when I would see guys like Ed Watts and people that really knew how to render, people that could draw like Guy Cassaday, I didn't go to a dedicated transportation design school or program, and those guys really, they knew what they were doing here, But I always loved mechanisms and how things work, and as a result, you kind of, you had a chance, first of all, to see all these different people doing things, in ways, and we learned from each other, we worked together a lot of times on collaborative things here, and that was a lot of fun. Got to know everybody. And Dave, of course, had a tiny little lathe in his office. Bill was really good at painting, and Guy was just, he just did some big stuff, man. And I don't know how he even conceived stuff like that,
Yeah.
King of big vehicles, as we call them. So,
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
So Frank, you joined Hasbro in 1986,
Early
working
80s.
on the GI Joe brand. So you came into this line during the biggest year in the history of the IP. How was the creative environment at Hasbro when you got there, and how was it throughout your time there?
Well, so when I got there, I forgot about this, but I'll tell you, when I was in Detroit, the designers had to wear ties, and of course when I'm cutting stuff, all the designers tuck their ties in their shirt,
Sure. Yeah.
When I got there, the first meeting we had, I remember they were at the end of the meeting, they started throwing cookies at each other, and I just thought, man, they're all wearing, shirts with button down collars, and Deguana was there, and it was just a really light, friendly atmosphere. They were building the R&D facility when I was there. That we moved into, I think, not too long after I was there. But yeah, it was just kind of crazy. There were a bunch of drawing tables that were kind of, haphazardly set up. I had taken over one of the designers who had left, and the people were working. Guy Cassidy was, on the one side of me here. He was working on the mobile command center, and we had a bunch of people working on this huge project that, was the what became the Space Shuttle Defiant. I had a chance to work on laying some of the plumbing in because they were just trying to get, all the detail and things done here. So I was kind of learning at the same time doing and, working on graphics for the maggot. But it was just a wonderful environment. And again, just so much talent there. And all these guys were young. We were all in our, young, early 20s, maybe. I never really knew anything about the GI Joe line other than what I grew up with as a kid, which was the 12-inch figures.
A lot of your earlier concepts were very still real world, right? The Warthog and the Hammer. But as time went on, I think a little bit more of that fantasy came out with the Razorback or the Retaliator or even Avalanche.
Well, and there's some earlier ones too that I totally forgotten about, except for your book stand, where you had pictures and it brought those up here. But like things like the Nomad that I did, which was based on a real vehicle. We were actually trying to introduce this 6-wheel vehicle line, the updated V300 to the Saudis, I think. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't produced. I think the Hercules might have been one of those that you showed, and I have no idea what I was thinking when I did the Hercules. So some things had some integrity. Others, I'm like, thank God they didn't do that.
Those two vehicles specifically that you just named, I'm all about those vehicles.
Are you really? Okay.
That's right. I think a lot of it is the what if.
Yeah.
Hey, I read your review, by the way, Chad. That was the thing that I remember is you said all these great things about the Hercules, and I'm thinking, hey, well, somebody actually did appreciate that.
Oh yeah.
Hell yeah.
I think it's very important to talk about this stuff, to share that knowledge with people. Frank, can you speak on the importance of world building in toys, in toy lines?
I think that anytime you have a vehicle line where everything kind of works together, that was the beauty of GI Joe. It's kind of like Lego. Everything would fit with everything else, in that particular scale. And I think that for a lot of kids, when you're whether you're playing individually, one of the things that I pride myself on is I tried to create as many vehicles that either split apart or could be used by more than one person, because that to me was added value. That's something you can't do, with a real military vehicle. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in one that split apart necessarily.
No, not really. No.
Chad's like, no.
Yeah. But there could be some value in that, so I'm not sure how much life imitated art when it comes to GI Joe, but I think that for kids that are that played with Joe, it's like girls that play with Barbie. My daughter was an only daughter, so she didn't have friends to play with all the time or another sister, so that was her way of being able to get into to playing with other people, interacting, and I think that's a vehicle that toys provide. That fills an important role of a kid's child's development. GI Joe is one of those few lines that I probably ever would have gone into. I don't think I ever would have gone into a different aspect of the toy industry. But GI Joe had an appeal to me that was something I still tell people that was the best job I ever had. And even though I never served our country, doing real military vehicles gave me at least an opportunity to understand and appreciate what those people who do serve, need. And, we make if we can make something good and safe for them, that carries on into some of the philosophy that I still have in trying to improve the world through products and the skills that I've been given.
Did any of you guys, while you were working on A Real American Hero, did you ever consider or think about the impact that Joe would have on kids to, shape us and us want to go pursue careers in the military and like protecting the public because of G.I. Joe?
I guess I never really considered that. Mark Pennington, one of the figure guy that was there when I was there, he was military. He had actually had real military background.
Right.
And but I don't think that we really were. That was not something that we actively would have done. I think DeGuano, also our general manager, Steve DeGuano, was also former military. I suppose because we had the cartoon and kids were watching that, I felt like there probably were people that were drawn to the military because of that. And in some ways, I to try to glamorize something where, if you've ever been in battle and you have, there's things you don't want to glamorize. People that I know that have actually done things, they don't talk about them, because it's not a, battle and combat is a last resort, if diplomacy fails, but, we have to have people doing it. So,
Right.
But that was never part of what our mission was, or our intent, to try to make sure that things weren't perceived as being military was actually what Hasbro was trying to do by keeping things apolitical and not making reference to nuclear and radioactivity and things like that. Trying to,
right.
Make a particular ethnic group or a country seem like they were the enemy. That was something that I think was very wise, for them to do.
Yeah, the daring, highly trained special mission force tag for G.I. Joe really widened their left and right limits, and it wasn't just like, this is a military line. Like, it could be fantastical, it could be adventurous. You could have vehicles like, the Razorback, which I love that vehicle. It's very toyetic. It has a lot of awesome play features. And not necessarily just be Sky Strikers based on an F-14. The Mobat is based on the M70 main battle tank, and you could kind of expand those horizons, which I thought was very important to not only the play time for the line, because I loved my play time with G.I. Joe as a kid. I could do anything I wanted, but it was also important to the longevity of the line as well, and I think that was a very smart approach to it.
The 60s were different. Look at some of the figures back then. They were very country specific.
Oh, yeah.
I think the world was changing so much, and I know when Bob Prupus and those guys were talking about bringing Joe back, they wanted it not to be just one character, but more a team. But it really was a team effort, all the way from the person who designed the vehicles like Frank to the person who was doing the instructions on the vehicles. So us as kids knew how to put these things together. One of the coolest features, to Chad's point, was like the 2-in-1, adding that play value. Because I was pulling up a couple of images. Like, you had the Raider that broke off, you had the Mean Dog broke off, you had the Condor broke off. So you had like a lot of your vehicles that had that 2-to-1 feature. I mean, there's a couple others that weren't yours, but that's one of the unique things I think about what you've done too, is doing those type of vehicles and stuff.
And I always try to at least, have plausibility in how my vehicles worked. I wasn't trying to make them so, fantastical that they weren't something that you could actually see maybe working. Being able to do something where you're pushing the envelope. The Condor, of course, is one that I don't know if I want to be in that one either.
Yeah.
Feature wise, I just always thought it was fun to expand the features, and things like dog bone mounts where, you have to pull the missile off, and if there's different ways or better ways to do that, that was something that I may not have targeted, but eventually happened. You could use things like gravity to make things happen that were more advertisable, and, kids might be able to do things that were a little bit more fun, easier, so there's some human factors involved. And this is where industrial design, even though we're just doing toys, can play in, and all of us were industrial designers that were working on the vehicles, and pretty good ones too, as far as that goes.
Speaking of missiles and different ways of storing versus dog bone and playing with missiles. You were very instrumental in a certain type of technology with missiles specifically, and how we changed play. Do you want to touch on that?
Maybe my legacy there is I was the father of FFT, finger flick technology. It's basically, you're just flicking something and, when I got there and I saw the little thing on the bottom that says weapons do not shoot, I just asked, why not? And they said, well, if you have a stored energy mechanism, which means, a spring and a trigger, it has the potential to accidentally be discharged, by somebody. And if that's the case, then, that there's a certain energy rating in joules that they have that something can't exceed. So to try to minimize the impact that would be given by that particular projectile, this was a way by eliminating that mechanism. First of all, it's more reliable. Your finger's always going to work, but that was something that I put on the back of the hammer. I think it may have been the first vehicle, and then of course, the better working version of that was on the Avalanche with the the ratcheting elevating ramps, and then also doing things like on the Condor with the little snap-in missiles that you could slide down that would drop the bombs candlestick fashion. The Condor Z25 had 25 total rounds on it. That's how the number 25 came about. I think Dan's got that in his book. We had, I think, 7 bombs in the carousel in the front that was activated by rotating the vent, 2 on the canards, 2 on the tail ends, and then 7 in each of the sliding cartridges. So there was some meaning in that. But, again, when you're trying to advertise things on TV, those are features that as they're doing the commercial, the kid can interact with, and that just lends to some of the excitement. But when you see a box and it's got flames coming out of it, I think maybe the assumption could be from some that maybe the vehicle does fire. So that was just an exercise in how to get that to happen. Now, actually, on the Avalanche, originally the turret, the ice mines were actually activated by your finger. You just flick them and they kind of index down by themselves. And I think maybe after the motorized pizza thrower came out, they decided to change that. But I had left, and by the time they released that, there was a spring-loaded missile on the side of the side gun on the Avalanche, and also a little lever that had the spring thing that would flick the mines out. So that might have been an improvement, but that was the intent, was just to have something that doesn't jam and doesn't because you don't need any parts.
Do you wish you were able to have stayed on a little longer and experienced some of that freedom to incorporate some of that into your vehicles?
I might have, but again, Dan, in your book with the Grizzly, I had one vehicle that I thought was one of my favorite ones. The Grizzly was an armored personnel carrier that had kind of a unique turret in that there was no loose projectiles in this vehicle. The idea behind this is that there was a closed system where there was a round that you could chamber into a big side gun on the turret. And the idea, real world, and I think there was going to be a sound mechanism on that. So when you chambered the round and you shot it, it would fire, make a noise.
Can you talk to us about some of the little toy Easter eggs that you worked into vehicles that you had a hand in?
Each one was, again, dedicated to an individual. The Warthog to my cousin, the Razorback to my brother, the Raider to my dad, the Avalanche to the engineer I worked with at Cadillac Gauge, Scott Collins. The chief engineer at Cadillac Gauge was the Hammer. The Evader was to my friend Rick and Cindy Brado. One of my favorite vehicles that unfortunately is also on the top 10 worst Joe toys list, the Mean Dog. But the Mean Dog was originally not called the Mean Dog; it was called Mad Dog. It was changed to Mean Dog, but that was dedicated to my wife, who used to be a Terry Hewing, and so this is, I think it's like an XT Hewing or TD Hewing, and but the Mean Dog was dedicated to my wife here.
Wait, so you're telling me that the Mean Dog is on the top 10 worst GI Joe vehicle list from someone?
Yeah, well, yeah, they were, it was, I forget which one it was, but that was the one. They didn't like I think they made reference to the very, oversized Gatling gun in the middle. There was a reference made to that, but it was pretty funny,
But it comes out and it stands on its own. It's awesome. That's toyetic. There's play features in there. Hey,
we just ignore those people who write those articles.
Everybody's
right?
a critic about something.
Yeah.
It is one of the more bizarre vehicles that I ever did, and I'm not even sure what what maybe come up with that. But that was definitely that had influence from because that vehicle was done after I did the maggot, and I think that was probably some of the articulation. Trying to replicate some of that or do a continuation that was a Joe themed thing was probably some of the thought behind that.
I've asked this question of Kirk Bazigian, Ron Rudat, Daryl DePriest, several other guys who had significant hands in Real American Hero, like yourself. So I'm going to ask you as well. Do you keep tracks at all on the current trends with toy companies these days, specifically regarding lack of vehicles, lack of play sets, lack of battlefield accessories, lack of any kind of world building? And if you do you have any opinion on that?
I don't think that a toy line like that might ever be produced again because it was just the right time, the right people, the right mindset. And thank God I was there, man. It was just such a privilege to have been there, for that. I don't know that anybody really has done things the way that we did them, at least not in the scale that we did them. Of course, Lego, has an incredible world of product that, that's why they're the biggest toy company now out there. Is they just have some terrific stuff that, is different themes, but as far as a single theme and, being able to have the figures and some of the things that we had back then, I don't know. I do applaud the Operation Recall and the declassified people. The collector community, you guys, is really driving a lot of the new stuff that they're doing with Joe. What Dan's capturing, of course, in his book, and what you're doing with your podcast is you're capturing that by the creators. And again, even though I played a very small role in that in a very small time frame, it was still one of my greatest joys and maybe contributions, as a designer. So I've always been grateful for that.
It's very interesting that the term that's been going around for a while, and it was coined by Michael from Retro Blast, fans do the best work. And so these days you do see your companies that are more independent toy companies making vehicles, doing world building things, making, smaller play sets, and you don't see the big corporate toy giants doing it. Mattel still kind of does, because with Masters of the Universe, they'll always bring back a Castle Grayskull or a Snake Mountain. They just crowdfunded a new Eternia. But the interesting thing, as a lifelong Joe guy, you don't see that with G.I. Joe anymore.
I think it's tooling. It's probably related to tooling, but also, when you have the support of a cartoon, and that's part of the, the culture. That was something I learned this past summer that I guess I never really thought about because, that was such a driver in kids wanting to buy the toy, and when that ended, probably around the time I left or shortly, 88, 89. I'm not sure when that was, but, those are things that were I'm not sure that the companies would ever commit to things like that again. Although, there's the line that shall never be mentioned, that's still going.
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the things is the challenges with, I think, G.I. Joe, it's military, right? But I think it does need that entertainment, and I would love to see a new Joe cartoon.
Hell yeah!
What about the Cobra Revenge? Because the Cobra Revenge was, you're starting to creep into Guy Cassiday's category, right?
That was pretty intimidating. Yeah. And I'll be real honest, at that scale, it was very daunting to even, to do that. And I think some of the mock-up, I think I didn't do an actual tread. I just drew a picture and copied it, and that was adhered to the side. But yeah, that was going to be a fairly large vehicle that, like I said, there were so many things I was working at the very end that really, 'cause I was just kind of in a rhythm, I guess, and I was just enjoying it. And I'm not sure how many of those things actually would have made production.
That was, again, one of those vehicles. I'm looking at a top view of it, and just in the cockpit itself, you had 3 characters that could sit in a cockpit on one side. So then you had another side of the cockpit. So literally you'd have 6 characters. And
Hmm.
again, I think Chad and I were talking about this the other night. But as a vehicle line, the figures were the accessories. And this
Yeah.
goes to that whole thought process of, this thing is going to have 6 characters just alone in its cockpit, let alone now you have the turrets. So you have more guys out there and so
Mhm.
forth. So, I mean, to really, load up the sales of the characters.
And
I
that
mean,
was part of the brilliance of the line, is that everything was cyclical, it was symbiotic, because you had action figures, but then you needed the vehicles and the play sets and the battlefield accessories to go with your action figures in your
mhm.
boys action line. And then depending on the number of seats in the vehicles or foot pegs on the vehicles, you want to buy more action figures to fill your vehicles. And then when you buy more action figures, you need more vehicles.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Really?
that's the commodity, And
Right.
Joe, it's interesting you guys said that because a couple of vehicles I worked on, some vehicles, that were large enough had a driver, and then some like the Evader. Yeah, those were actually, you bought the figure and the vehicle was the accessory to the figure. And so we might only have two. I think most of those were just 2 molds, small. There's like I
Low
think it was
cost.
gold and
Yeah.
black for the Evader, and then maybe blue and red or something for the Dictator. But those are again, as you got the marketing people looking at things and doing things like the foot pegs. I've seen criticisms and about some of the vehicles that I did, and while it's a cool vehicle, but there's not enough foot pegs on it. It couldn't hold enough characters, and I get that. Razorback being an example, the Avalanche being another one where maybe there's only a couple of, I could have put more provisions on that. Well, and the problem is we were trying to create a lot of what, the term was purpose air, a lot of bristling and, how you make something stick out as much as you can, kind of like the
Right.
gecko on the Jurassic Park, and that was by making things bristle. So you create this, this greater perceived value. And that was part of the challenge is because we were marketing and designing toys at different price points.
And knowing is half the battle.
The reality is, guys like me and Dan couldn't do what we do to, carry on the appreciation and show the love for the work that you guys did without all of you.
You had the kindness to invite me to the show in Phoenix that one time, and I had a chance to bring some of my stuff together and experience what it was like to be around, collectors, and had the people with the furry tails and the furry ears. I'd never been around that before, so
Furries.
It's definitely an experience here in Phoenix, apparently.
There's so many lessons in how culture was at the time, what the manufacturing state of the arts were, what advertising and the reality of the competitiveness of the toy industry was all about here. And you've done a great job. And hey, thanks, Chad. And again, from my standpoint, man, I really enjoyed your podcast. I'm not sure why I even saw it, but I watched it in its entirety. And when you got to the part about something, if that was actually the Hercules, you said some things that made me feel pretty good, actually. So very, very very astute, comments and about things that I don't even remember. So,
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in what you guys are doing here. So, I applaud what you guys did, and I'm just glad I had a small part to play in creating some of the stuff you guys are talking about and reviewing.
But here comes the G.I. Joe Hammer with twin FFT missile banks and rotating machine guns.
Well, there you have it. I can't thank Frank enough for coming to hang out with me and my good friend Dan Klingensmith and discussing all of the awesome vehicles that he had a hand in while he was working at Hasbro on A Real American Hero. The father of finger flick technology before spring-loaded weapons came back. Frank's a really awesome guy, very knowledgeable. He's got really great stories, and I'm just grateful that he spent the time to come have this conversation with us.
Hell yeah.
One thing I'm very passionate about is preserving the history of G.I. Joe, and I'm very thankful to Frank for coming and sharing his stories and his knowledge and all of the insight about what he made, why he made it, and his super awesome unproduced vehicles. Can't forget those either. I want to thank everybody for checking out this video. If you're new here, maybe hit the subscribe button on your way out. It's something free that you can do, and you can check out my entire library of content. Thank you to my subscribers and my channel members. And if you'd like to consider supporting the channel further, the link to become a channel member is in the description below. Also in the description below is the link to Dan Klingensmith's The Toy Files podcast and his super awesome Creating G.I. Joe book series. If you haven't gotten in on that, don't sleep on it, right? He's in the sell-off period, and these books are going to go fast, and then you won't be able to get them except for on the aftermarket. And then when you cry about it, that's on you.
Chad, how insensitive of you.
But I want to know what you think about this interview with Frank. As always, leave a comment below. Let's talk some super awesome finger flick technology, Joe, and have an awesome day.